Good morning, Project 938. My name is KG. I'm the Kids and Youth Director. And it's my belief that there's two kinds of people in this world. Some are like my wife, that they just wake up, and this is wild, but they just wake up and they can just see everything. They just see absolutely clearly. They have perfect vision. It's like they're watching the world in 4K definition. And this blows my mind because never in my life have I been able to just wake up and see. Without these things, I'm just completely blind. I can't make out a face that's 4 feet in front of me without these. It's kind of like viewing a Zoom call when both of you have terrible Wi-Fi connection and everything's pixelated. That's how I see the world. And here's some images. An artist recreated some images of what it looks like for people that need glasses or contacts to be able to see. And for some of you, this is a really strange phenomenon. Some of you really resonate with that because you just view the world like I do. I have a -7.5 prescription in both eyes. It's one of the worst I've ever met. The only person I've ever actually met that has a higher prescription than that is my little sister, Leah. She has a -10 and -11. She can't see a thing. And then there's other people in this world that they can see, but not in color. I know a couple people, I have some friends that are colorblind, and there's viral videos going around right now of people that all of a sudden they get these special glasses where they can see color for the first time. And they're just so overwhelmed with emotion because they've never seen green grass or a blue sky before. And it's a whole new world that's been opened up to them. And then there's other people that they just can't see at all. And we encounter a person like that in our story this morning. We're at the very end of a series called Jesus Among Us. And we've taken a look through the Gospel of John in the New Testament where Jesus encounters different kinds of people. And the last one in our series that he encounters this morning is a man born blind. And we're in John chapter 9. And it starts off just like this. It says, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? See, the disciples asked a fair question. In that day, if you were born with a sickness or disease or ailment of some kind, it was a belief that it was either because of a sin, it was a consequence of your sin or a sin of a generation before you. And so the disciples, they were asking, was it his fault or was it his parents' fault that he was born blind? But Jesus, as he often did, he came to flip things upside down and to change the way that we see the world. And so Jesus answers, he says, it's not because of his sins or his parents' sins. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the task assigned us by the one who sent us. The night is coming and then no one can work, but while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world. How perfect that Jesus says, throughout the Gospel of John, he has a lot of I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am living water. How perfect that is, as he's about to, spoiler alert, give sight to a blind man for the first time in his life. He says, I am the light of the world. He's about to heal this man born blind. He's about to allow him to see light for the first time ever. And Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Because throughout this chapter, there's not just a physical sight that this man gains, there's a spiritual sight. And there's this beautiful comparison that's made throughout this chapter between physical blindness and spiritual blindness. And how perfect and how appropriate that Jesus says, I'm the light of the world. Because this man's not just about to gain his physical sight, he's about to gain spiritual sight as well. One of my favorite quotes is from C.S. Lewis. It says, I believe in Christianity like I believe in the sun. Not just because I see it, but because by it, I see everything else. I can't think of a story that's a better representation of that quote. And so we continue in our story and Jesus heals him. He does it kind of weird though. He spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. Then he told them, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. I don't know why Jesus decided to do it this way. He spits on the ground, makes mud, and then he decides to put it all over the guy's eyes and sends him off to a pool. And imagine the emotion that this man feels at this moment. He just has Jesus put mud over his eyes. He goes out to a pool and he washes in the pool. And then he opens his eyes and for the first time in his life, he sees. Can you imagine if you could never see anything in your life before and all of a sudden We don't know how old you are. It doesn't matter if you're 15 or 50 years old. You open your eyes and you see for the first time everything in your life has changed. He looks up and he sees water for the first time. He sees trees for the first time. He sees people walking around for the first time. He sees the sky and the clouds and the grass for the first time. He looks in the pool that he just washed in. He can see his own reflection for the first time, his own hands and feet. He's never seen any of this before. His whole world changed. That's not how he expected his day to start. He didn't wake up that morning thinking, hey, I'm going to be able to see today. No, but everything changed. And here's what I love. He hadn't even seen Jesus yet. He hadn't seen Jesus yet. He didn't know where Jesus was at this point. But he had seen what Jesus had done, and that changed everything. But as soon as his world changed, the questions started coming at him. The next verse says, his neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, others said, no, he just looks like him. But the beggar kept saying, yes, I am the same one. People that knew him and saw him day in and day out didn't actually believe his story, didn't believe it was him. They knew him, they recognized him, but they couldn't believe the miracle that had taken place in his life. As soon as Jesus changed his life, there were people that were doubting, they were skeptical about his new life. That's the way that it's going to be sometimes. When we make a decision to follow Jesus, there's going to be people that doubt it, that they're questioning it. They're not fully understanding what we're jumping into and what we're saying and the encounter that we've had with Jesus. But all this man knew was that he had an encounter with Jesus and nothing was the same anymore. And so these men continued asking him, and they couldn't quite make out if it was actually him or not. And so they decided to bring him before the Pharisees. The Pharisees was a group of religious leaders in that day and age, and they had it out for Jesus. They were not big fans of Jesus, and they tried everything they could to trap Jesus, and they thought they had an angle here because Jesus had actually healed this man on the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day, going back to Old Testament law, the Sabbath day was one day a week that the Israelites, they weren't allowed to work. It was supposed to be a day of rest where they rested from the work that they had done. And it was a law that God gave. It was a good law for the people and a law that we should follow today. It was a good law for the people to be able to rest. And the law was meant to give life. But over time, they had added all these rules and regulations to this law that actually snuffed the life right out of the law. And so these Pharisees came and they were coming after Jesus because they said, hey, he broke our rule, he broke our law, we have an angle on him. But Jesus was actually fulfilling the law by giving life to this man on a day that was intended to bring life all along. But this man was brought before the Pharisees. Imagine the most intimidating group of people in town. That was the Pharisees. And this man, he had no education, no training in the law. He was a beggar. He sat on the side of the road and begged for a living. That was his life. That was his livelihood. And all of a sudden, he's brought into the Shark Tank in front of some of the most intimidating people in town who start questioning him about what had happened. It says the Pharisees asked the man all about it, so he told them. He put the mud over my eyes, and when I washed it away, I could see. I love how he just starts really basic. He just starts by stating the facts. He's still probably trying to figure out what exactly had happened, who this Jesus guy was, because he hadn't seen Jesus yet. And so he just simply states what happened. He's like, this is the facts. I was blind. He put mud on my eyes. I washed it away like he said, and then I could see stuff. And the Pharisees, they start arguing among themselves. Some of them said this man Jesus is not from God, for he's working on the Sabbath. Others said, but how could an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs? So there was a deep division of opinion among them. Then the Pharisees again questioned the man. The second time they bring questions for him. They said, what's your opinion about this man who healed you? Imagine the pressure now escalates on this guy. This guy's had a really interesting couple days here. He wakes up blind, he's healed, he can all of a sudden see. Now he's brought before the Pharisees. They ask him just about the facts, but now they're asking his opinion on it. And you can kind of tell he's still not entirely sure of himself. He's still not entirely sure of who Jesus is, but he offers his best guess. It's like, hey, you guys asked my opinion? And so the man replied, I think he must be a prophet. He's not entirely sure. He has no education, no training in the law. But he says, hey, a guy healed my blindness. I've never been able to see. Now I can see. He has to be more than just a regular guy. And then things get kind of hysterical. Have you ever been in middle school and you're called into the principal's office and it gets so bad that they call your parents into the principal's office with you? That's happened. That's terrifying. What would be even weirder though is you're an adult and you get called into your boss's office and your boss calls your parents into the same office with you as you're an adult. I don't fully understand that, but all of a sudden the Pharisees, they need an extra witness, so they call his parents in to take testimony, and they call in, they ask for their opinion on the matter. And so the parents come in and they said, we know this is our son. They confirmed that. We know he was born blind. They confirmed that. But we don't know how he can see or who healed him. Ask him. He's old enough to speak for himself. This man born blind is now left all alone. His neighbors doubted and were skeptical. His parents kind of just left him out to dry because his parents were afraid of the social consequences that would happen if they said, hey, this man, Jesus that healed him, he has to be a prophet. He has to be of God. His parents were afraid of the social ramifications of this. And so they just left their son out to dry. They confirmed the facts. Yeah, he's our son. Yeah, he was born blind. We don't know what happened after that. And we're not going to say any more than that. So they leave him out to dry. So this guy is all on his own. But at some point around here, things start clicking for him. Rachel shared earlier about someone in Rooted that talked about things just started clicking when he was in community with other believers. And for different people, things start clicking at different points in time. Maybe it's when we're spending more time with other believers. Maybe it's when we're spending more time reading God's word or praying. And maybe it's just when we've hit a wall in life and we can't figure it out on our own anymore. That was what it was for me, where things just started clicking. At some point in time, things start clicking. And it started clicking for him because the Pharisees called him in a second time. They said, God should get the glory for this because we know this man, Jesus, is a sinner. And at this point, I feel like the guy's kind of had it. He was questioned by his neighbors. He's been questioned twice by the Pharisees all of a sudden. And now he's brought in. His parents left him out to dry. His own neighbors didn't recognize him. And he's left all alone. And you almost feel like he doesn't care about the social ramifications anymore. He doesn't care about the opinions of others because he knows his life has been turned upside down and things start clicking for him and becomes more bold and more unashamed about it. And he answers these guys with way more strength and way more boldness than he has before. He says, whether this man is a sinner or not, I don't know. But one thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. I love it. He says, I don't have all the answers. I don't know if this guy Jesus is a sinner or not. He says, I don't have all the answers that you're looking for. This is what I have. This is what I know, that though I was blind, now I see. People, we don't have to have all of the answers. I know I don't have all of the answers. There's been tons of times people have asked me questions and I simply say, I don't know. But this is what I do know, that though I was, now I am. He lays out the formula of what I believe every testimony of every follower of Jesus is. And yet the details of my story and his story and your story might look different. We followed different paths, but we followed the same basic formula, that though I was, now I am. That there's a point in time where we were before Jesus, and then Jesus entered the picture. We had an encounter with Jesus, just like this man born blind did. And then everything was different after that. That though I was blind, now I see. Though I was, now I am. It's the testimony of every follower of Jesus. If you're a Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus, you have this same story. You have this same testimony. And you don't have to have all the answers. You have that. And that is enough to share your faith, to stand boldly in your faith because you've encountered Jesus. Jesus has walked among you. And there's no greater thing than that. There's no greater story or testimony than that though I was, now I am. And it might be a different fill in the blank for each of us, that though I was rejected, now I am accepted. Though I was hopeless, now I'm hopeful. Though I was excluded, now I'm included. Though I was without purpose, now I'm on mission. Though I was addicted, now I'm open and I'm honest. I'm honest with myself and I'm honest with those around me about the things that I'm facing and struggling with. And though I was shamed, now I am honored. There's something that happens at the comma where we encounter Jesus, when Jesus has walked among us and we've met him, we've truly met him. And this guy, he met Jesus. He hadn't even seen Jesus, but he had seen all that Jesus had done. That he changed everything in his life, that though he was blind, now he could see. And nothing was ever the same. And he gains a new boldness. And like that quote by C.S. Lewis, he believed in Christianity like he believed in the sun, not just because he could see it, but because by it, he could see everything else. This man didn't just gain physical sight, he gained spiritual sight as well. That by this encounter with Jesus, he could now see everything more clearly. And he didn't have all the answers, but he had a story, he had a testimony, he had an encounter. Jesus had been among him and nothing was the same again. Though he was, now I am. And then he became visibly different. I love this. I love what happens next. He becomes visibly different. The Pharisees asked again, but what did he do? How did he heal you? Look, the man exclaimed, I told you once, didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? I love that. He just starts getting sarcastic with them. Then they curse him and they said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from. And then the man becomes visibly different. He becomes outrageously bold in who Jesus is. Not in his own powers or abilities, because he didn't do anything to heal his sight. If he could have done something to give himself sight, he would have done it long ago. But he becomes bold about who Jesus is. He says, why, that's very strange. He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he comes from? We know God doesn't listen to sinners, but he is ready to hear those who worship him and do his will. Ever since the world began, no one has been able to open the eyes of someone born blind. If this man were not from God, he could not have done it. There's a visible difference that happened in him. And then this man gets kicked out of the synagogue by the Pharisees. He was willing to stand firmly in his faith, because he couldn't help it, because Jesus had changed his life. He couldn't deny it. He could not deny who Jesus was. And forget the consequences, whatever they were, he was willing to stand in his faith. Are you willing to stand in your faith, in your testimony, in your story of what Jesus had done? And that though I was, now I am. Are you willing to boldly stand in that? Because for me, nothing's ever been the same. And when you stand in your faith, people will notice. They will take note. They will see a difference when you're living through that encounter you've had with Jesus. My wife works as a nurse. She's been a nurse for a couple years. And because of the way that the birth of our son fell, she's been on maternity leave throughout this crisis, but she returns to work tomorrow morning. But when she was at her first hospital, it was another big hospital in Philadelphia. She's a wonderful nurse. She's so loving and compassionate and intelligent. She just makes a great nurse. But she started feeling a conviction a couple months into her career of not just caring for her patients in the physical sense, but also in the spiritual sense. And she just felt a conviction that she should begin praying for, but also with her patients, which was a really bold step, to be able to ask patients if she could pray for them and to be able to ask them if she could pray with them at their bedside. But she felt a very strong conviction about doing that. And so she started with one, and she just started praying with and for her patients. And very few people, even if they don't believe in God, will refuse prayer when they're going through hard times. It's just what I found to be true. And so people would say yes, and she started regularly praying for and with her patients. And some of her coworkers started taking note of that. And this just would happen time and time again. And there came a time where there was another nurse on the unit, one of my wife's coworkers, that was taking care of a patient. And this patient asked her nurse, she said, "Is there someone that can pray for me?" And the nurse said, "Well, we don't have a chaplain here, but I know there's a nurse on our floor that will come and pray for you." And she went and got my wife. And this nurse didn't believe it. She's not a believer. She's not a follower of Jesus, but she knew who my wife was, and she knew what my wife stood for. My wife doesn't go into work carrying her Bible every day and all that stuff, but when asked, she boldly stands in her faith. She's not ashamed of who Jesus was, because she's had an encounter with Jesus that though she was, now she is. Jesus has changed everything in her life, and she boldly stands in that. And when you boldly stand in your story, in your testimony, when Jesus has walked among you, when you've truly encountered him, and he changes everything. It changes the way that you live, and it changes the way you see the world, and it changes the way the world sees you. Because God just doesn't help us see in the physical sense. He helps us see all things a little more clearly. Will you pray with me? Dear God, we thank you for this day. And God, we thank you that when we encounter you, nothing is ever the same. You change everything. And God, we believe in you like we believe in the Son, that not just because we see you, but because by you, we see everything else. And God, when we encounter you, you change everything. That God, though I was, now I am. Though I was rejected, now I'm accepted. Though I was shamed, now I am honored. And God, that's not because of anything that I did. It's because you've done the thing that I couldn't do. So God, we thank you for your sacrifice. We thank you for your love that is never ending, that is just always there for us, that takes us back time and time again. God, I pray that we would be a people that boldly stand in our faith. God, I pray that we'd be a people that remember what you have done in our life, that we remember our encounter with you, and that, God, you continuously walk among us. I pray we'd be a people who would not be ashamed of who you are, but you are the first thing that we think about, and that we would boldly share you when people have questions for the reason of the hope that's in us. We love you, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.